young Mordechai there? They're deep in debate. Mazel tov to the Bendons. I'm just going to mute them. I hope
you mind if I have this?
nothing personal. It's just very loud from there. Right, 1 second. So Iris, we've been struggling without you. So
oh dear.
Yes, it hasn't been the same. So off we go. Right.
Moses assembles the people of Israel and reiterates to them the commandment to observe the Shabbat. He then conveys God's instructions regarding the making of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. The people donate the required materials in abundance. Isn't this what we had in Kitissa? Aren't we?
Yes.
Last week, Shabbos.
No, it wasn't. It was Teruma Tetzava. So Vayakop Kodei is more or less almost word for word repetition of Teruma Tetzava. We have, I think, learned this before. We discussed the idea that the first time is when they're given the commandment. Second time is when they're actually carrying it out. And the difference between the theory and the practice. But yes, it is repetitive.
Okay.
Well,
sorry.
Carry on. Yeah.
The people donate.
And the open flour and the open sugar, still want to keep it, yeah?
Go on.
He then conveys God's instructions regarding the making of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. The people donate the required materials in abundance, bringing gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and red dyed wool, goat hair, spun linen, animal skins, wood, olive oil, herbs, and precious stones. Moses has to tell them to stop giving. A team of wise-hearted artisans make the Mishkan and its furnishings as detailed in the previous Torah readings of Teruma, Tetzaveh, and Kitissa. 3 layers of roof coverings, 48 gold-plated wall panels, and 100 silver foundation sockets. The parochet, the veil that separates between the sanctuary's 2 chambers, and the masak, screen, that fronts it. The ark and its cover with the cherubim, the table and its showbread. The 7-branched menorah with its specially prepared oil, the golden altar and the incense burned on it, the anointing oil, the outdoor altar for burnt offerings and all its implements, the hangings, posts and foundation sockets for the courtyard, and the basin and its pedestal made out of copper mirrors.
Thank you. 1 sec.
There was the moisture in the brickwork. How long ago was
Okay,
that?
1 second. Okay. I think that's it. Let me see if there's a whoops. Sorry, I just Brandon, nothing personal. I'm just going to mute you because we're hearing Mordechai in the background.
Oh, okay.
Just for a minute. Sorry, Pam. Julian, I just muted you by accident. Okay, right. So that's Vayakal in a nutshell. Okay, are we all over 18? Yeah, I think so. Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. So whoops, 1 second.
What has that got to do with anything?
Probably you'll see in a minute. So it's quite an adult topic today. So we're going to talk about the mirrors that they used to make the basin in the temple. Yep, that's right. Thank you, Beryl. Right. Source number 1. Who'd like to read?
Shall I read, Rabbi?
Yes, please.
The men accompanied the women, and those who wanted to make a donation brought bracelets, earrings, finger rings, and body ornaments, all made of gold.
Right. This is from this week's Sedra. So, says the men accompanied the women, and those who want to make a donation brought bracelets, earrings, finger rings, body ornaments, all made of gold. Besides the assumption that probably most of this jewelry belonged to the women, from the way that's worded, who do you think is the primary subject of this sentence? The men or the women?
The men were subject to the census, weren't they? Because it was to do with men of...
Okay, you put all that out of your mind. Just read this one sentence and tell me the women, right? The men accompanied the women. So the women went first and the men followed on. So the women had a big role to play. Let's see the next one. Source number 2. Who'd like to read? Any volunteers? Brenda, you want to? Trying to unmute you. Oh, there we go.
Well, every skilled woman put her hand to spinning, and they all brought and spun yarn of sky blue wool, dark red wool, crimson wool, and fine linen, highly skilled women volunteered also spun the goat's wool.
Right, thank you. And the third place we find the women mentioned as well. Anyone who hasn't read? Anyone want to read? Julian, are you
I
there?
haven't read. I'll read.
Oh, Jeff. Jeff, yeah.
Every man and woman among the Israelites who felt an urge to give something for all the work that God had ordered through Moses brought a donation for God.
So quite a lot of emphasis on the women here, right? Let's just go back again. The men followed the women in donating, it seems. The women put their hand to spinning and whatever. And every man and woman who felt an urge to give something, right? So quite a lot of emphasis, it seems, on the women. And in fact, as we said, the first one seems to be even that the women took the lead. And by the way, this is what the various commentaries say about this. The Hebrew says, I didn't give you the Hebrew here, but Vayavo ha'anashim al hanashim, the men came to the women, upon the women, on sort of on above, not above, but like on top of, like in addition to the women. So the women seem very central. Now, why do you think the women might be so important in the context of things we might have read in recent Parshas regarding silver and gold?
With the mirrors.
The mirrors is something from Egypt we're going to come to in due course. But
Mm.
what was in last week's Sedra? What was the big drama in last week's Sedra?
Golden
Golden
calf.
calf.
Right?
Yeah.
Who refused, according to the commentaries, who
men.
refused to give, right? The women. So who do we see? Surprise, surprise. Had the good
yeah.
sense of judgment.
Yeah,
They knew what
they
was
took
true
the gold.
worship. Yeah, they knew what was
They took
false.
the gold from the earrings to make the calf.
The men took the gold, but the women initially refused to give, we're told.
Mm.
Now, actually, more interestingly, the Kli Yakar, whose commentary says that actually the Mishkan came to atone for the golden calf, right? They built a golden calf. They thought they were going to worship, but meanwhile, Hashem told them to build a Mishkan of gold, which would be a replacement, which would be a true place of worship. So, question: if the women didn't really do the sin of the calf, it was the men. Why did the women have to contribute at all? And yet they gave, and not only did they give, but they gave first. So, what's going on here? So, let's have a look at Exodus 38:8, and I think somebody mentioned this, possibly Beryl. Anna, would you like to read? Sorry, wrong one. Oh gosh, sorry, wrong source. This, sorry, here, right? So before we do that, let's just read this to remind ourselves whose fault the calf was. Anna, would you like to read number 4? Sorry.
Yep. Aaron said to them, "You men, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me."
Okay, we can discuss consent and ownership and chattels and all kinds of things, but bottom line, the men basically sounds like forcibly took the jewelry from the wives. Right. Number 5. Let's have a look at this rather cryptic one. I think we're back to you, Iris. Would you like to read? Is Julian on? Julian? No. Okay, Iris, would you like to read?
He, Betzalel, made the copper washstand and its copper base out of the mirrors of the dedicated women, Hatzoveot, who congregated at the entrance of the communion tent.
Communion sounds awfully Catholic, doesn't it? The Ohel Moed. Right. So, interesting. They made the copper washstand and the copper base, which, just to be clear, was used for all the ritual washing that took place, right? This is the kior, the wash basin, was made from the mirrors of the dedicated women who congregated, right? Anyone know what these mirrors were? Very famous mirrors.
Didn't they get them from the Egyptians?
And what did they do with them?
Looked into them, presumably.
Let's see what Rashi says. Okay, we're back to Jeff or Brenda. Would you like to read? You'll have to unmute, huh?
I'm mute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Israelite women owned mirrors, which they would look into when they adorned themselves. Even these mirrors they did not hold back from bringing as a contribution toward the Mishkan. But Moses rejected them because they were made for temptation. For example, to inspire lustful thoughts. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, accept them, and these are more precious to me than anything, because through them the women set up many legions. For example, through the children they gave birth to in Egypt, when their husbands were weary from backbreaking labor, they, the women, would go and bring them food and drink.
So I asked if you're all over 18, right? It continues.
Then they, the women, would take the mirrors, and each one would see herself with her husband in the mirror. And she would seduce him with words saying, I am more beautiful than you. And in this way, they aroused their husband's desire and would be intimate with them, conceiving and giving birth there. As it is said, under the apple tree I aroused you. Song 8.5. This is the meaning of what
This is the quote we just had, B'marot Hatzavot. Yeah.
The mirrors of those who set up legions. For these, the mirrors of washstand was made.
But it's interesting. It seems a criticism of Moshe here, according to the Midrash, right? So the Egyptians enslaved us, right? We know also Pharaoh wanted to kill the male children. But also, you know, when you're a slave and you're backbreaking labor, the last thing on your mind probably is as nice as it is to spend time with your other half, it's probably the last thing on your mind, right? And also you probably all look ragged and, you know, you're all dirty and whatever. So the Midrash tells us that the women realized that basically there's going to be no future without procreation. So they used mirrors to make themselves attractive to their husbands. And the result being that they ultimately, their husbands came to them and they had children, and there was next generation was born. And only because of this was there basically next generation. Otherwise, there would have been no next generation. So we're told that the women, through their mirrors, through their preening themselves, right? It's a very physical, very superficial thing, but through their beauty and their concern to make themselves attractive to their husbands, basically secured the Jewish people. That's what the Midrash says. So when Moshe says to the Israelites, bring offerings, some brought gold, some brought silver, some brought bronze, some brought jewels, and the women had nothing of value except their mirrors. They brought their copper mirrors. And Moshe says, oh, you know, these are the mirrors that you use to seduce your husbands. How can these mirrors have it's an object of, it's really interesting this, because actually, not for me to criticize Moshe Rabbeinu, but this is something discussed with couples before marriage, that the whole perception of human intimacy and sexuality comes from Christian sources, right? And whatever you call it, prudity. So this whole, it's dirty, it's naughty, priests have to be celibate. We see how well that works, right? Judaism says no. The first commandment is to go forth and multiply. Please get married first. Go to the mikveh. Please be discreet and modest. Don't, you don't have to be doing it in a train carriage or on the beach. You can be at home in your bedroom, but enjoy each other. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing sinful. I will say to people, if somebody says to a married couple, are you going away for a naughty weekend? Why is it naughty? Naughty implies you're doing something wrong. What's wrong with a couple spending time together? There's nothing naughty about it, right? The word dirty this, dirty that. Oh, you've got to, I would posit that if a husband said to a wife, how do you fancy spending some time together tonight instead of, I don't know, whatever, going to whatever, let's just go to bed. And she says, oh, you've got a dirty mind. No, according to Judaism, you've got an incredibly pure mind. Actually, it's a beautiful thing, So, but Moshe says, oh, so why do we have this perception? It comes from Christianity, basically, a culture around us, which is a very prudish culture that sees it as weakness, which is why Catholic priests are supposed to be celibate, because it's a weakness, right? Judaism says, no, it's not a weakness. It's basic human biology, human need. Adam and Eve. Leave your parents and cleave to your wife, right? Just please do it, get married first, and preferably go to the mikveh and all these things. So it's interesting that Moshe had this, according to Midrash. I guess it's understandable. There's still a modesty. So you might say it's a beautiful thing that these women use these mirrors, but you have to parade it on show for all to see. So Moshe says, no, these are cheap. They're used, what they call nowadays slut shaming almost. How can you that the women used, whatever, and you want to put them in the sanctuary of God? And Hashem says, Moshe, these are the most holy thing in the world. These mirrors were used by women to fulfill the first mitzvah in the Torah, to go forth and multiply, to make them attractive to their husbands. And the result is we have a whole generation of Jewish children. I can't imagine anything more beautiful than that. So, but you see, the faith and the strength and the not the cunning, that's not the right word, the street smartness of the women. But also something very fundamental about Jewish life, which is we have an understanding of how human beings work. Right? Because, why couldn't I don't know if they had rabbis in Egypt, but why couldn't the leaders turn around to the men and say, stop being such wimps? I know your wife doesn't look so attractive when, you've both been slaving away all day, but unless you want us to die out here in Egypt, you just need to go and, please your wife, whether you like it or not. But no, the women adorn themselves and they, it's, we have certain basic needs. We shouldn't forget that we get all holy and religious and so on, but we are basic human beings that work in a basic way. And love, no, I'm not talking about sex, love as a sort of value, as a emotion, as a, what do you call it? A bond is something that we find in Torah all the time. In fact, the Song of Songs uses quite explicitly the analogy of spousal love for the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Sometimes quite explicit terms. There's a book called Love, A History. No idea what it's about, but thanks to Rabbi Sachs, we know about it. By someone called Simon May. I suspect Simon May is Jewish. Anyway, this is what he says. I'll read it. He says, if love in the Western world has a founding text, that text is Hebrew. So he's saying that love, as we understand, it doesn't come from Shakespeare or Lady Chatterley or whatever. It comes from, who was that? Chaucer, right? Chaucer. It comes from the Bible. We see love as supremely physical and spiritual. What does it say in the Torah? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, right? It's a language of passion. Maimonides is a philosopher, right? He's a rationalist. Let's see what he has to say about love. Very interesting. I don't know where we're up to. Who'd like to read? Is Julian on? Julian, would you like to read? You've been very quiet.
Okay.
Right.
What is the love of God that is befitting? It is to love God with a great and exceeding love, so strong that one's soul shall be knit up with the love of God, such that it is continually enraptured by it, like a lovesick individual whose mind is never free from passion for a particular woman and is enraptured by her at all times. Even more intense should be the love of God in the hearts of those who love him. They should be enraptured by this love at all times.
Wow. So what analogy does the Rambam give, right? A very holy rabbi, a very rational rabbi, for us as ordinary beings to understand what love of God is. He says it should be so strong, it should be like a lovesick individual who's pining for a woman that he has a crush on, basically, and he's enraptured by. Is that the best you can come up with? Seems so tacky, and no, this is actually the highest. If you want an analogy for true passion and love, look no further than human relations. It's the most basic interaction and the most deep interaction you can have. And we find it in Tehillim as well. It doesn't look good without the Hebrew, but it's Samalacha Nafshi, Kamalacha Basari. It's a song, and it's also Rabbi Sachs asked that it be on his stone, on his tombstone, 3 words, Samalacha Nafshi, my soul thirsts for you. Kamalacha Basari, my flesh longs for you. Now, what does that mean, my flesh longs for you? It sounds very erotic. This is the language that we use. Right, that's why the Song of Songs, they didn't say it was a dirty poem. They said this is an expression of God's love for the Jewish people, often in very explicit terms. So Christianity came along and said, oh, Adam and Eve, it's all about forbidden fruit and forbidden desire. That's not a Jewish thing at all. Let's see what Simon May has to say again. Right, who'd like to read? Who hasn't read for a while?
Shall I read?
Go on.
The love of God in Judaism is characterized by intense devotion, absolute trust, fear of his power and presence, and rapturous, if often questioning, absorption in his will. Its moods are a combination of the piety of a vassal, the intimacy of friends, the fidelity of spouses, the dependence of a child, the passion of lovers. The widespread belief that the Hebrew Bible is all about vengeance and an eye for an eye, while the Gospels supposedly invent love as an unconditional and universal value, must therefore count as one of the most extraordinary misunderstandings in all of Western history.
Interesting, because I said that I think of Christianity as being very Puritan, and it's all about the sin of the temptations of the flesh. And as he says, actually, people talk about the Hebrew Bible, the God of vengeance, and meanwhile, Yoshka is love and all this kind of thing. But actually, this kind of whole condemnation of any kind of passion or love is a very Christian one, actually, and it's crept into so much of our culture. It's fascinating. Right, let's see what Rabbi Sachs has to say. Sorry, someone was going to say something? No?
No.
Julian, I was like, you're good at reading Rabbi Sachs. Off you go.
Moses believes that closeness to God is about celibacy and purity. God teaches him otherwise, that passionate love, when offered as a gift to God, is the most precious love of all. This is the love we read about in Shir Hashirim. It is the love we hear in Yedid Nefesh, the daring song we sing at the beginning and towards the end of Shabbat.
Right, just for those who've never read the English of Yedid Nefesh, this is just the first translation that came up. I'll just give you a little taste of it. Soulmate, merciful parent, draw your servant to do your will. For your love is tastier than nectar or any imaginable delight. Pleasing in splendor, light of the world, my soul is love-sick for you. So again, it's this language of almost erotic, really. Right, carry on. Yeah.
When the women offered God the mirrors through which they aroused their husband's love in the dark days of Egypt, God told Moses, "These are more precious to me than anything else." The women understood better than the men what it means to love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might.
Right. Seems a bit of a Mars Venus thing, this. So I don't know if Moshe's symptomatic of all men, that he just kind of assumed that there's something sort of seedy about it, and God says no, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. These mirrors that these women used to entice their husbands to make sure they could have children in the dark days of Egypt. What could be more holy than that? And not just because it's keeping the Jewish people going, but because this is how we understand love and all these analogies that we have. It's quite interesting stuff. And that's why I asked why everyone's over 18. So there we go. It's a little bit adult today. Right. Any questions or comments? I shall have to, when I put it on YouTube, I'll have to put, it says, is this meant for children? I have to put no.
It's quite interesting because it's sort of echoing a theme that Plima brought up in the Women's Outbreak, talking about Esther and the story of Purim. That
Right.
there's an aspect of it whereby the women sort of represent or symbolize the physical more than the spiritual. So as when you were saying about the women understanding procreation and everything, it sort of echoes that. I don't know whether
it's interesting because the sort of lived experience of most people is that men are much more biologically as well, much more straightforward, I want to say, in their needs, and women are much more not complex needs, I don't mean it like that, but much more sophisticated needs, shall I say. And yet here we're almost saying the opposite. We're saying, it's a most basic base thing. These mirrors, which they use to make themselves look beautiful, to be attractive to their husbands, is a very basic, raw physical thing. It's not particularly sophisticated. I mean, it's sophisticated in its own way, but it's interesting, almost a reversal in a way. but then I suppose it's the women using their knowledge of how the men work as well. But yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know the other interesting thing is that you might recall it's not mentioned explicitly, but we've talked before that it seems that Moshe split from Tzipporah at some point. I don't know if they actually divorced, but they were estranged. I don't remember where it says that, because he was spending too much time at work, basically, right? Talking to God all the time and ignoring her.
Rashi
It's Rashi.
at the beginning of Vayikra.
Go on.
So Rashi at the beginning of
Thank you very much.
Vayikra, where he explains the little aleph. So
thank you.
So Rashi says that the Oracle came to see him to console him about the split.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know if it says anywhere that maybe Moshe also had an idea of being, sometimes people get the idea that there is the idea that piety sometimes is connected to a certain almost celibacy in a way, right? There is that idea. We do find sources which we do find sources which talk about, high levels of piety might involve some abstinence from the pleasure of the flesh. There are sources for that, that there were always there's different ways of serving Hashem. And we definitely find the idea of minimizing pleasure sometimes used, but it's something that should be used sparingly. In the same way somebody said, for most of us, Shabbos is having special meals and nice food and meat and wine. And, for Mr. So-and-so, who's such a holy person, he sits and learns all day and he just has bread and challah and wine. Okay, that might work for him, certain types of piety. But for most of us, that's not what is asked of us. I think it's fascinating. I would like to look more into the Midrash about this whole thing about Moshe saying not to use the mirrors and Hashem saying, no, you should. But it reflects a fundamental understanding of the world, which is the most basic thing in the world, which is that Judaism sees beauty in everything, including the most basic human pleasures and desires, as long as channeled in the right way. Right? We say it with everything. Money is not evil. Use it to serve God. Give tzedakah. Gold was created for the temple. It wasn't created for people too much bling. It was created for the temple to adorn and to serve God. By all means, be wealthy. Please God, we shall be wealthy. Just use your wealth in the service of God and others. Drink alcohol, provided it's not dangerous and you're not an alcoholic. But say a l'chaim at your Shabbos meal with your friends, or have it at a simcha or under the chuppah. Don't abuse it. Same thing with human intimacy. Don't abuse it. Don't abuse others. Use it, enjoy it, but use it in the right context. It can be the most beautiful thing in the world. And I think the crucial point with all these things is it's not a concession to human weakness that we have so many mitzvot that involve the physical world. It's the whole idea that we are elevating our everyday experiences and our everyday interactions. We are elevating them by doing them through the lens of Torah. So it's not really, we'd all like to be hermits and live on a mountaintop and never speak to anyone else and never get married and live on bread and water. But unfortunately, we know that there is an element that the soul is forced into this world and, after 120 years goes back upstairs and connects to God. But the fact is that the fact that we use this physical world to serve God is not a concession to weakness. It's our purpose in life. It's the purpose of being here, is to transform. So it's no different with anything else. So when we use this language, when the Shir Hashirim uses explicit language, the Torah uses this language. When the women come to Moshe and say these mirrors that we use to entice our husbands to procreate with us and fulfill the first mitzvah in the Torah are the most holy thing in the world, Hashem says, you know what, they're right. It's a very special way of looking at the world around us and the opportunities it presents. Reb Mordechai, Mazel Tov on your grandchild.
Thank you.
Yes,
Mazel
Mazel Tov. Hope everyone is
Mazel
well.
tov.
And such great timing for the great-grandparents as well.
Isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Wonderful to see everybody.
Jeff and Brenda, you're looking younger just by being in better weather, and probably by being around the family and having nachas as well. You're looking very
Yeah,
youthful.
we're better from distance.
Yeah.
The longer it is, the further away it is, the better we look.
I'm sure it's doing you good. It's doing you good.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we're still getting
Enjoy.
over the air travel, but yes.
Yeah.